We're going to tear into a Kawasaki Vulcan motor today. We've got the rear of the engine here. We've got the front here. We've got our intake manifolds here, exhaust manifolds here, and in the back here, we've got our clutch cover over here and our stator magneto assembly over here. So I'm going to go through now and I'm going to dismantle the top end. I'm going to show you how to remove the heads, remove piston, cylinder, get that out of the way, then clutches and stator. So we've already got the cylinder head cover off here. We've shown a couple other videos on adjusting valves, stuff like that, so make sure you check those videos out. That is why we have this head cover off at this time. All right, we're gonna pull the front cylinder head cover off here. It is 3 10mm bolts that you've got to remove, and they're specialty bolts, so make sure you keep those in the right spot. We've got the rear. I'm gonna set that right on top, keep all those bolts together there. Now we have our two cams. We've got a dual cam on either cylinder head here. We've got our intake here, exhaust here. Same on this one, intake and exhaust. I'm gonna go ahead and remove these cams. We've got 10mm bolts holding these camshafts on there. What you want to do is make sure you remove your cam chain tensioner. That's over here, and then there'll be one on the other side as well, right over here. Make sure you remove those before you remove these cams. The reason why you want to do that beforehand is because there will be some tension on these cam chains. Because of the tensioner, typically it'll do this. They won't even loosen up until you take and kind of tap on that cam chain tensioner. That'll remove the cam chain tensioner. There is a gasket or an O-ring there that'll seal that up. Now we've got some tension there, and you can see it's a little bit less. All right, then we also have a tensioner here. That is a 17mm plug there. You've got that spring pushes against that guide that's in there, and that'll loosen it even more. We'll set that aside. We'll go and do the other side here, and because of where it's at, we're gonna have to get a wrench in there to do that. We got the top one here. Again, this is a 17mm cap. This is to the front of the motorcycle there. I'm gonna remove that, and then I'm gonna go ahead and pull this tensioner here. Got our socket that can pull this one. Now we've got this front tensioner that's ready to come off here. Take and tap on that to break that seal free. We've got a hose, an oil line here that is kind of holding this up. We're gonna remove this oil line here. We've got those two 8mm bolts off. We've got a 10mm up top here. Another 10mm lubricating the front cylinder head there. We've got an oil line that's clear down here. Takes an 18mm, and this has an oil sensor on this plug here. We'll remove this entire thing, which you probably won't be able to see very well from the angle you are. That should free us up here and should be able to move this oil line right off of here. There we go, oil line's free. Take and pull that up there. That's a specialty oil line, obviously. So make sure you keep track of which direction that's going together. And now we'll be able to pull our tensioner off there. Again, that's the front. We're gonna pull these camshafts off here. Going to the rear here, gonna do the same thing. All right, now you can just take, and once all those bolts are free there, you can just take and lift up on these. If any of these bolts have got even a thread attached, it'll cause you some grief, so make sure those are completely unthreaded before you start going up with it. There's the front is off. Now we've got our back here. Okay, and we'll pull these off. Now this is the rear, so I'm gonna set that with the rear. We've got our cam sprockets here that we're just gonna kind of pry up and out of place there. We'll be able to pull them off. Put that with the rear parts there. Again, with the rear parts, I'm gonna let this chain drop because we are just gonna go all the way down. You wanna keep track of where that chain is there. And then do the same for the front. We've got intake here and exhaust here. Intake side is actually a little bit longer, so that would be a notable difference there. Same way with this intake on this side. So intakes are longer, keep that in mind. The rear cylinder ready to come off here. We've got a rubber gasket that fits down into these camshaft cutoffs here. Just make sure that you don't damage this gasket here. They are hard to get a hold of now. We've got 14mm head bolts, 4 of them here, and then 4 of them on this cylinder. We also have 10mm head bolts down the bottom here. We've got 10mm nuts here that are castle nut right down by your spark plug hole there. And then you've got a 12 millimeter nut that comes up from the bottom on that stud there, right underneath your intake. So make sure you find all those before you try pulling this apart. You also have one on the exhaust side under the exhaust manifold. You can pull the exhaust manifolds. You don't have to remove this cylinder head, but we're going to, just because a lot of times it's easier to impact them here while they're attached to the actual cylinder and the motor here, rather than trying to wrestle with it on the bench there. Those nuts that are down in that head, we're actually just going to leave at this point. We want to make sure we are careful with the washers that are down in there. We have our rear cylinder head ready to come off here. One other thing you're going to want to do before you remove that cylinder head, or you won't be able to remove that cylinder head, because that cam chain will wrap around your spark plug there. So I grabbed a bigger pair of pliers here, stick them inside here. You can get an Allen wrench to fit this, but you can take, and a lot of times, put enough pressure out just like that. You can unscrew these caps. You can also get these reverse pliers that you push down just like a normal set of pliers. It expands then, and you can remove it that way. I've got a set of those too that a lot of times I'll use, but there's your plug there, and then it'll actually go down. That cam chain will then drop. Now you can take and pull up on these. Then you can just take and walk that head off of there. We'll take and put that on its side. I told you we were going to pull this exhaust manifold here. I'll do that at this point. It's a 12 millimeter there. A lot of times these get pretty rusty. All right, and that exhaust manifold's ready to pull off there. We also have our shield that is going to come off with it. And there's our exhaust manifold. We'll put that with the rear stuff there. We've got our cylinder head here. We've got our valves there. We've got 4 valves, 2 exhaust and intake. We want to make sure we keep track of all those cylinder head nuts. I'm going to set this aside and let this head drain the oil that's in it. We've got our cylinder head gasket here we can pull off. Remove that. We've got this guide here we can remove. Takes a 10 millimeter. It's a specialty bolt there. So make sure you keep track of those. There's also an O-ring that'll seal these up. So just be careful when you're removing these. We'll set this with the rear cylinder parts. There's your guide there, kind of an unusual guide setup there. Keep that all together. Our chain is loose there, and then we've got a separate chain that goes down into our crankcase there. Remove this cap. And now we've got a screwdriver, kind of put some pressure on it, and then there's just a shaft that comes out here. And those sprockets will drop down. Going up to the front here, we've got the front exhaust manifold, 12 millimeter bolts again to remove that. Those are removed. Go ahead and pull this off. We've got our cylinder here with a 12 millimeter bolt on the front and on the back of this motor. Then check the sides here. We've got these 10 millimeter castle nuts that we already have loosened up. We'll go ahead and pull these. Again, over on this side, we've got your spark plug tube here. Off of there, we've got this here that'll hold that gear on for our cam chain. Remove those so those guides can get out of there. And go ahead and lift this front cylinder head off of there. Same thing on this side. You've got the nuts that'll fall out there in your washers, so pay attention to those. This has got a good set of valves on there. We'll set that aside. We've got our 2 guides there that we can pull out now. Take our screwdriver and slide this shaft out again. There's actually a area for threads in here, so you can take one of your head bolts or just a metric bolt there, slide it in. You can pull it out using that. Our 12 millimeter bolts down in there. Those both are out of there. Okay, we're going to tear into the stator, the charging system here. We've got 8 millimeter bolts all the way around. We've got a Phillips screws here, three screws here that we're going to pull this all off here with these 8 millimeters. All right, you can take a rubber mallet, tap on it there, and then pull up on it. There will be some magnetic pull there because of the charging system. You've got some magnetic force behind there. Okay, and then we've got our shift shaft here that kind of holds you up so you can take and use your thumb and kind of push that shift shaft out, and that'll allow you to take and pull that stator off just like that. Got your wires to work under here, and they kind of go between the clutch arm there and that case. So got that pulled off there. And then behind your stator, obviously, you have your flywheel. And you got to have a special puller to remove that flywheel. So keep that in mind before you start in on this project. But there's our stator there. We've got our 2 pulsers here. We've got, obviously, our stator and coils here. We've got our wires coming out. Looks like if you pull this cover here with these 3 Phillips, you're going to be able to get to your flywheel here to at least turn this bolt. If you're trying to find top dead center, you can do that from this side here. Here we've got 17mm bolt to remove this. That's just regular threads. All right, we've got our puller here we'll run in. That's, again, just regular threads. Throw a socket on the end of it there. Take our impact. Turn it in. What that does is just push against that crankshaft, and it'll actually pull that flywheel off of that crank there. Go ahead and spin our puller out because we're finished with that. And then there's our flywheel. This is the lower chain here that goes up to the sprocket that sits on your cylinder. We'll go ahead and remove that. Then we've got a 10mm to hold this guide in, a 10mm right here, which I'm not totally sure the purpose of that. And then we've got a guide right here that we can pull out as well. The tensioner for this guide here. All right, that guide is out of there. We pull that out the bottom. This is for the front cylinder. We'll set it with these front cylinder parts there, along with this tensioner. There, we just take and pull that chain around that crankshaft there. Now we should just be able to slide everything up the top there. All right, we've got our oil relief valve here. We've got a larger gear here that we'll remove. 17mm to pull this relief valve off. Got a 14mm bolt here to remove this gear. Okay, this bolt is actually reverse threaded, so keep that in mind when you're pulling it apart. It actually loosens the way that you would typically tighten it. So, kind of an unusual gear there. We've got a couple of dampers here, and this is for your balancer. And slide that off there. We've got your oil line that runs here, and then a handful of GIS bolts, screws to remove there. Go ahead and use an impact driver on these because they're typically a little more challenging. We got that oil line off there. There's our shift shaft here. We're actually not going to be able to pull it out all the way this way, but we do need to remove these snap rings here. Your starter on the bottom here, 2 8mm bolts to remove that. Then you can just take your starter then, just wiggle it up like this, and it will just pull right out. It does have 2 O-rings that seal it going into your clutch cover side there. So you do want to make sure that it does have that O-ring there to seal it, so it sometimes is a little more challenging to pull off there. We got some dirt and debris that gets stuck down in there, but otherwise this starter is actually in really good shape. We've got our output gear here. We'll go ahead and pull that off. We've got 8mm bolts around the outside of this. We've removed a handful of them already. They're a little bit longer screws there, and you can just take and pull this off. This is your bevel gear, your output gear here, and you can see there the 2 gears, the 2 bevel gears that work together. Now you can actually take and shim these so that they fit together better, so they're a tighter fit. And I suggest you check that periodically to make sure that those are in good condition, not wearing too much. We've got our clutch rod going through here. That was that arm that I had taken off, and this goes all the way over to the clutch on the other side. Here's our high and low for our engine oil. This cover will pull off 8mm bolts around the outside. All right, lift that cover up. Underneath there, you've got your shift mechanisms. We've got a 10mm and another GIS there. All right, we've got a spring-loaded arm there. Put that aside. We've got a shift star here. got our shift star pulled off there. I'm gonna go ahead and remove this 10 millimeter and this larger bolt here. 19 millimeter, pull this bolt off of here. You can see it's dinged up there, and that is to keep that from spinning off while you're in use there. So I'm gonna set that aside. We're gonna have that pulled off there to split that case. Got our 2 snap rings here. Pull these off. All right, we'll remove that. Underneath here's your oil pump. We'll see that from the other side there. Got a handful of 8 millimeters I'm gonna pull off now. A couple of 10s. All right, we've got 3 of the 14 millimeters off there. We'll set these aside. We've got a drain plug here. I'm gonna pull that off. There's really no reason to for splitting the case, but just to have it off of there, I'm gonna do that now. 17 millimeter drain there. He's got a spring in behind there. That spring is out. Now I'm actually gonna take and flip this motor to the other side. We'll work on the clutch assembly. All right, we've got our clutch cover here, 8 millimeters all the way around this. If you're just wanting to deal with the clutch basket and the friction plates, you do have to just remove this round cover here. And I'll do that just so you can see what it looks like just removing that cover. You're not gonna get the whole clutch assembly there. But we'll remove that. There's a gasket underneath this. All right, once you get those 8 millimeter bolts removed, this cover will come off there. We've got a gasket around there. That's what it looks like underneath there. You've just obviously got your clutch basket underneath here. Remove this gasket, replace it every time you end up pulling this cover off. We're gonna go ahead, just because we're gonna dig into it farther than this, we're going to remove this larger cover here. We've got a water line that runs down there, so just be conscious of that when you're pulling this apart here. It's got an O-ring that seals that up, so it can just be a little bit of a challenge pulling that off. And our clutch underneath there, we've got our impeller here for our water pump. We've got our starter idler gear here, and we've got our cam chain, lower chain that's here, along with our guide, our tensioner behind here. So we're gonna go ahead and pull this clutch off. 10 millimeter bolts there, they've got springs underneath of them. Keep everything together. All right, now we can go ahead and pull this top cover off here. Underneath there is a larger nut. We'll go ahead and remove that. At this point, we'll leave all the friction and steel plates together there. Take and I grab a hold. I don't want this clutch spinning while I do this. Just regular thread, just comes off counterclockwise. Okay, then what I like to do is actually take and put this back on there. This hub here, slide it all the way down, put these in. The reason I'm doing this is because I actually don't need these clutch plates taken apart there. We're gonna keep these all together. So I'm gonna run these screws in, snug them up. Obviously, these are gonna be pulled off again fairly soon when we go back together, so you don't have to torque them down or tighten them up there too much, but you just want them snug. You can take and pull this entire assembly off together. We've got your needle bearing that goes in behind there, and we've got a washer here that a lot of times will stick to your shaft underneath there. So that's our clutch assembly there. I'm gonna set that, let some of that oil drain out of there, get some of that old oil out. Now we're gonna take and remove, we've got a tensioner here that's gonna be removed with a 10 millimeter, and then a larger gear down here that holds your chain on there. 10 millimeter bolt here, that's for the guide. Our tensioner here, we'll take that tensioner out. This is for the rear cylinder. Our guide just kind of fell right out of there. And then we'll go ahead and remove this 17 millimeter bolt there. And I don't want this to spin. I don't know that the motor will spin, but I like to hang on to this chain just in case. So it did spin a little bit, but we got it pulled off there. Now we've got that bolt off. And then we have this gear that's going to come off here. Keep in mind you've got a woodruff key in behind there. You just want to keep an eye on that so you don't lose that there. We've got our chain now. That'll come off of there. We can slide it over top of this shaft just like we did the front. And now we can pull everything up here. We've got the rear chain completely off. We'll push that woodruff key out there now at this time. We just don't want to forget about it there. Go ahead and remove this impeller here. It's probably going to spin, so make sure you watch your finger. That's kind of a sharp edge there. I do like to hold it, so just make sure you don't catch your thumb on there. But you can hold it. It's not extremely strong if you're using a 3/8 drive there. And you can take and wiggle this impeller off just like that. It's got a rubber seal in behind it, so it sometimes can be fairly challenging. Go ahead and pull that washer off our idler gear. 14 millimeter to pull this gear off. All right, we've got that one removed there. That's a specialty washer, so keep that in mind. It's a tapered washer. Just remember where that goes. This is going to be a one-way bearing underneath here with your one-way gear. This is for your starter assembly. This is so when you hit your starter there, it'll engage, and then once it gets started, it'll actually disengage. So you want that one-way bearing functioning properly, going back together there. Okay, then we can just take and pull this one-way gear up. This is the whole assembly there. It's got splines on here. We've got 3 Allens on the back here to remove this one-way bearing here, this whole assembly. Handful of 8 millimeter bolts, and we're gonna actually go ahead and remove these cylinders here at this time. Take a rubber mallet there, kind of tap on these cylinders. We've got the front one here, and we're getting ready to slide that one off. A lot of times it will take, again, a little bit of persuading there. Okay, and once you get it started, then it'll just slide right off of there. So that's your front cylinder. Inspect those walls, make sure they're in good condition. And we've got our piston here. I'll show you how to remove those. Okay, same thing in the back. Once it's free, just take and pull it off just like that. We've got our back piston here. We've got a rear cylinder. We'll measure that, make sure it's not out of round, make sure it's in good condition. And then we'll take and put these on top dead center, which is the highest point up. And we'll go ahead and remove these piston pins here. We'll take a pick, pry out in the groove there. I like to put my finger over top of there. The circlip doesn't go flying there. Then you can just take your finger, push out the pin there. Get it completely out, and we'll take and slide everything back together. That way it all stays together. These pistons appear to be in really good condition, but we'll inspect it. We may end up having to put new rings in there. We'll see once we get everything cleaned up and ready to go back together. Put the piston pin, the clip back in there. I take and I shove the closed end in as far as I can. Take a pick or a screwdriver, slip that back into place there. That keeps everything together. And then do the same with the rear cylinder here, or the rear piston. Okay, this piston, we're having a challenging time getting this crank up far enough. We obviously have a crank that's shot down here. It's not turning all the way, so I'm gonna leave this piston in at this time. We're gonna be able to split that case without removing this piston, and I'll be able to get that pin out once these cases are split here. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove a couple more 8 millimeter bolts that are holding us together there, and then we'll have this case split. Okay, then we have a handful of 8 millimeters below here. All right, and then before we get too far splitting that case, we've actually got to remove the oil filter here because we have a plate that's on behind it that has got a couple 8 millimeter bolts that'll hold everything together there. So that's what the plate looks like. Those cases are just held together by those bolts. Now we can spread stuff apart there, and then once we get it kind of to an area where we think it's going to be, we don't need a hammer anymore, we can take and set it on its side. And take and lift up. The reason why I kind of like to set it on its side there is so that we can kind of keep a lot of these bearings together on the gears and the shafts together. So that's why it's nice to slate on its side there and then pull it up. Obviously, you've got some stuff that'll drop. I just try to be careful with pulling it up. We've got a couple washers that have fallen out there, and we'll figure out where those go, make sure those get put where they need to go. We've got our oil pump shaft here that runs down to our oil pump here. Crankshaft is here. We've got the rear, the piston here that we can now pull out at this time. We've got an oil line that runs down here. This is just to lubricate different areas of this crankcase. We've got our oil filter bolt here that fell down in there. Grab that there. That sits at this spot here, and that oil filter attaches onto that. So fairly common for those to get damaged, and so those can be replaced separately. This crankshaft now, we can just take a rubber mallet and tap it out the other way. I'd like to get this transmission pulled apart a little bit farther before we go and do that. We also have a linkage down here. This works as a tensioner for this oil pump chain here. So you can see once we pull this oil line here, we pull this tensioner here, you can actually adjust this tensioner if that oil pump chain is getting loose. So go ahead and pull our shift drum out there. There's our drum and our shift star that we pulled off previously. We'll slide on there. We can tighten that bolt up there. We've got our shift forks here. There's 3 forks. Take and slide that shaft out of there. We can pull those forks out, and then we can take and slide our transmission out. A lot of times these kind of work together. This is out far enough, loose enough to where it just slid right out. We've got a washer that slides on the end there. And then here's our other shaft here with a handful of gears. So we'll pull that out. And then, like I said, that crankshaft, we tip this up, and a lot of times it'll just kind of fall out of place there. This one, we're going to inspect it to see if it is a rod that's bad, if it's the crankshaft, it's the bushings that are down in there. So keep an eye out for that. We'll show you how to inspect that, how to measure that. We've got our shift. We've got our water pump shaft here, and we've got a snap ring that attaches there, and you can push that water pump shaft out that direction. And then again, to pull this linkage out here, we've got a 12mm here. That's going to lift this side off. And then I would take and remove this Allen bolt here, and that tensioner should pop up. Then at that point, our shaft that runs along here. Here's a screen here that'll a lot of times stay inside there. You remember we pulled this and this off of there. So those 3 parts will go in there when it comes time to go back together. We've got a shift assembly here. Once we remove this nut here, this 12mm, that shift shaft will come out that other side there. So a couple more things to go here, and we will have this case completely stripped down. We'll go ahead, clean it up, and get it ready to go back together. Appreciate you guys watching. If you've got questions or comments, make sure and leave those below. Make sure you subscribe to our channel if you found this video helpful. Thanks a lot.